Well, tonight we have a very special interview at Queer News Tonight. Joseph Harwood, better known as Jojo, a CEO of a global brand, a global fashion artist brand of Joseph Harwood. She goes by Jojo. She's a model, artist, social media personality, and you became aware of her because she was the first ever trans person to win a reality-based talent competition, winner of Simon Cowell's The You Generation competition. And we welcome Joseph Harwood, Jojo, to Queer News Tonight.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting.
Well, first off, as we talk to each other live, everyone knows instantly because of your accent. Every American LGBT that's watching you instantly has fallen in love with you in the first 7 seconds because of that accent. I can hear it, and you're coming from Brighton tonight. Tell us about Brighton. You're on the English Channel, a little ways, a couple of hours south of London. Tell us what Brighton is like.
Brighton is a very unique place. It was called for a long time the gay capital of the UK because we have the most incredible pride and open here. I live in like the countryside. It's a bit of a strange sort of pocket that meets sea and the Downs. So I'm in a little bit tucked away from the city part, but it's kind of like an eccentric place. Before lockdown, it was full of all these incredible pockets of subculture. So there was lots of alternative people here. There's an amazing music college here, and there's two universities, so a lot of students. So it's kind of like a young place by the sea, and that's where I'm from. That's where my family's from.
Yeah, and for those that have not been to Britain, highly encourage you to go to Brighton. For Americans, Brighton is on the English Channel in southern England, and you can kind of think of it like Miami Beach in Florida on the coast, and having the same kind of culture as San Francisco. Brighton's a much smaller city, but for LGBT, that's what Brighton is really all about. On the water, and lots of culture, and an amazing LGBT place. Everyone knows London and Manchester, but Brighton always holds its own. It makes me, before we get into you as brand, I want to give the opportunity for American LGBT getting to meet you and listen to you. Any differences that you have noticed through your career and your brand, your fashion and artistic brand, of differences of LGBTQ in Britain versus the United States?
Well, and that's such a big to go into because the real reason that I launched on social media to start with, which was 2007, was because I was on a collaborative with trans identifying people. So this is before things were even widescreen online. This is before you can make money. And most of our cast on that channel, so it was every person of the week. So there was a Monday character, a Tuesday character, and I was a Sunday. We were all from different places. But growing up in Brighton, me and my friend who were from England were comparing our experience out of the US. And we were not taught about queer theory at all. And UK Ireland, we use different language. So androgyne was something that was really big. I think it came from the gender bender movement of the 80s with the likes of Boy George and Marilyn and so on. And I was hugely inspired by makeup artists like Serge Lutton, and they identified as two-spirited way back when, so even before they were an incredible brand. So our language wasn't really taught. We kind of had to find out and discover what was right for us. But androgyny was a huge thing in the UK, and it was kind of like a precursor to this was 2007 and 8 that we were going through these conversations that I think the news is talking about now, but we kind of, it feels a bit like redundant to me sometimes because I'm like, I think I did this when I was like 15. We went through all these funny like terms and things, and we realized that identity is just the label that you feel most liberated as. Who you are is a whole range of things.
Did you, as you were going and exploring this evolution for yourself, in the times that you've compared in contrast to what goes on in the UK for LGBTQ plus versus the United States, do you see differences in the American LGBTQ community versus Britain?
I do now. I think it has a huge part in that because there is an incentive to become known on social media. So there was a lot of that queer theory that's gone into teaching people usable content. Like, I grew up on YouTube when YouTube was about like skills, not necessarily opinion pieces. So I went through this whole experience of doing beauty tutorials, which reached over 100 million views, and me, myself, and two other people that were trans in the UK. We were doing this many years ago with no idea that it would ever become a phenomenon where you could be legitimized. In fact, when you were a makeup artist or a model, when I was starting, they said, get off social media, it's so unprofessional. Nowadays, I've seen a lot of the queer theory come from the US creators, and so many diverse and amazing people come from the US. The UK is more so, there's not as many people here, so you're not going to see as much diversity, and we don't get taught queer theory really unless you're going to a very specific uni here. So a lot of that has come from America. We've got a bit of a different history when it comes to this, and there was also labels and things that we used here that are very much not really permissible. It's agreed upon in our generation not to use things like cross-dresser and the T word. So that was part of our culture here. There were clubs that were all about that here, which wasn't in America, I guess.
Yeah, I want to take a highlighter of what Jojo just told our audience. 100 million views in YouTube, makeup tutorials, all kinds of different programs, products that you've done in YouTube. Fashion is a big part of your life in terms of clothes and makeup. I read that you walked in London Fashion Week for the first time at age 15, and you did it as androgynous. Tell us about what that experience was like.
Absolutely, and I kind of decided today I wanted to go down that route instead of like what people see as my colourful side, because I can do all different incarnations of myself, because I'm just one of those crazy kids that want to explore all different versions of me. But I grew up on MySpace, and I was scouted by an editor from Dazed and Confused magazine, and this is when I was 14, turning 15, and they invited me to class for Alexander McQueen's Dispersion Line McHugh. So I started modelling at 15. I then was scouted as like a high fashion model because I'm 6'3". I walked in London Fashion Week and then went to Asia, and I had a career doing editorial in Japan. So I had this sort of like wild whirlwind start, and I think it was when I was in Japan that I really fell in love with makeup, because I was seeing all the behind the scenes and learning all the secrets. And that's how I put it all on YouTube. I learned it from the best. And then I think when YouTube was this big platform where everyone could learn from each other, it was the right timing. I did it at the very beginning.
Yeah, I thought about you actually yesterday, and this impending interview with you. Yesterday, I watched for the third or fourth time the movie Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, and I love the film because of the English cleaning woman that is infatuated with the fashion of Christian Dior. And I thought about, in conversation with you as a model, makeup artist, designer, movies like that just seem to hit a bullseye for LGBT. Christian Dior in the 40s was the first queer designer that sent us on a path of a history of 80 years of fashion led by gay men and people from the LGBTQ community. What is it about the fashion industry broadly, clothes, makeup, runway, magazines, and everything that goes along with it? What is it about LGBT that drives so much of the industry and makes LGBT love the fashion industry? What do you think it is?
Oh, I've got a theory. I've got a theory on this. I think like when you are flamboyant and you want to play with all the colors in the crayon box, and you're playing, so you're trying different makeup on, and you look distinct from everyone else, like you become hyper aware of the difference that makes. So the power that you can get from wearing a different color scarf to everyone else, or the power you can make if you've got your skin cleared up or by using foundation, for example. I think if you've got an extra perception about what you can do. I mean, for me, I grew up with absolutely horrendous acne on my skin, and I used foundation to cover it up. So going to school as a kid with foundation, I looked dramatically different from all the other people in my class, because no one even my school. I lived in a tiny little village. So I knew how amazing and transformative things like makeup and then once I discovered that, I used my imagination. I used to hide in books and video games and just come up with character ideas and identities, and I'd become them. So I'd theme all my looks like one thing. And I think when you're I think that difference can be your superpower. And I think that's the brilliance of fashion and design and beauty and everything to do with image.
Yeah, that's lovely. And we all want to play with all of the crayons. And the crayon box is probably as good a definition of diversity embracement as I've ever heard. That's great. I want to talk about drag a moment. It's all of the rage of topic of conversation, news here in Florida, of course, Tennessee, Texas, and it's a top conversation in America. Last month, talking about attacks on drag queens, Vice News did a very good article that I read, and you came up in conversation, and it caught me a little by surprise because Vice called you, quote unquote, the Yoda of contemporary drag. And I thought that was such an interesting embracement of you. What do you think that they meant by that in the article, and how did you react to that?
That was I would laugh because I've probably got the same language skills as Yoda. I'm a bit backwards myself, but I was doing an interview at the time, and because of the timing of when I did my YouTube, it was when everyone was starting to learn about Drag Race. So the incredible Matthew Anderson, who was a makeup artist and was the producer on Drag Race, who did Rue's makeup, he did his hair and glam. He was kind of mentioning my YouTube when it started. So when everyone got onto the whole idea that we could all play with the idea of drag, we could all buy these ingredients online that could put us into this machine that makes the drag queen, I was the go-to tutorial person online. So a lot of the drag queens started to look at my YouTube videos and learn to do makeup from my videos. And then that went on to me doing the actual Drag Race girls from the show. So from a lot of the early seasons on the show, and my images all over the place because I've done magazine covers and so on and so forth. But I think that what they meant by that was kind of like a tongue-in-cheek, because instead of just doing a sensationalistic video where I said, look, I'm this and then I become that, what I did was I talked through different structural issues in the face, so I could tell the difference between the secondary sexual characteristics that happen through puberty between male and that's what I used as a blueprint to then apply makeup. So it was more like I could give more of a technical assessment about what I would do with artists instead of just showing you the before and after. And it was just like such a wonderful compliment that's with me for me.
Yeah, it was a wonderful compliment. And in terms of the high fashion of makeup that drag represents, RuPaul queens represent, even RuPaul herself. Some would say that Michelle is the biggest drag queen of the entire group, and her makeup. Who has really inspired you of your participation with, and who in drag has really inspired you of saying that makeup is just amazing? Who inspires you at RuPaul's Drag Race through the 15 seasons?
I'm not really inspired by the Drag Race, but Matthew Anderson was so influential with me. Matthew and Zaldi were on my wall when I was growing up, and they're the club kids back in the day. And there's a singer called Anoni, previously known as Anthony Johnson. They have been part of this troupe that came out of the Pyramid Club in New York City called Black Lips. And there was also an artist called Kabuki Starshine, our humongous makeup artist. So I looked at all these incredible people, and Pete Burns in the UK was one of my biggest idols, and I got to tribute him in his wigs actually for a photo shoot when I was younger. I love Boy George and Marilyn and Pat McGrath, and oh my goodness, there's been so many huge influences on me. Out of the contemporary show, I am so inspired by how tenacious and creative these young kids are, and I love seeing all of the amazing like DIY people, the people that make their own costumes, that do their own makeup and make their own things. I like watching people like that, and there's some icons like Raja and Raven from the show that I love.
Yeah.
So many of them are inspiring.
Yeah. I'm curious in terms of the inclination of RuPaul in the USA version, and now multiple seasons of Britain for RuPaul. Do you see differences in the fashion and makeup in the UK edition versus the American edition, and what are they?
Our queens, we've got we just lost one of our legends of television, let alone a drag legend, Lily
we reported
Savage.
That
my
at
God.
News Tonight. Yep.
Oh my God. Well, if you look at her incredible body of work, I mean, she did 175 episodes of a a game show called Blankety Blank, which is kind of like the Snatch Game, really. And she did that in drag on television in the 90s. It's just like, God. And she didn't have a professional makeup artist, but her costuming was based on like 50s using like a sort of like nod to northern glamour, and we have soaps on our television here on our main channels called Coronation Street and EastEnders, and they kind of have had these very strong matriarchal characters that have all had identity. So a lot of our drag comes from these sort of like characters that we see day in, day out, because it's on 5 days a week with these soaps. And there's like so much references that you can pull from that. And we've also got pantomime dames, which is an interesting parallel to America, because when you're a kid, it's part of your childhood to go to a pantomime. And our pantomime dames are drag queens, and we see them in like shows like Cinderella and the Seven Dwarfs, or Puss in Boots, and it's kind of like comparable to the Story Hour issue in America. But I've not heard anyone really bring up that we've been doing it here without issue for many years.
Long time,
and
yes, that's right.
So we have the dames.
Yeah, that's right. The pantomime.